Right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to morning of the 7th day of EAMS 2020. Got a couple of talks today. I'm going to swap the order around because I can't see the speaker for the first talk yet. So I'll just remind you of the program for today. First of all, we're going to have this talk, e-assessment for the Jinan University, University of Birmingham Joint Institute. From content development to assignment regrading, and then after that, assuming the speaker appears, we're going to have a talk on a Moodle question type for creating multiple choice questions fast. Okay, so let me get the video ready. Make sure I can do that properly. Right, so I think we will get going with the first talk.
Hello everyone, and welcome to our talk where we reflect upon our experiences over the past 3 years with Mobius. My name is Robert Leake, and I will discuss some of the technical details of question design and implementation later in this talk. First, John Mayer will provide some background and discuss our assessment pipeline.
To begin, we would like to acknowledge the contribution to the discussion in this presentation of the following people. Jonathan Watkins is Education Technology Team Leader for the College of Engineering and Physical Sciences. So John and his team provide support to those who use computer-aided assessment within the University of Birmingham, specifically the college. And this college includes hundreds of academic staff. There is myself and Rob, who are academic members of staff within the School of Mathematics at the University of Birmingham. And the three of us have been singled out because at one stage or another, we were responsible for the computer-aided assessment provision at the Jinan Birmingham Joint Institute. So, of course, Rob and I are not the only academic staff involved in the Jinan Birmingham Joint Institute within the School of Maths. We have fellow academic staff who are pictured at the bottom of the slide. Of course, we also need to acknowledge the contribution of our undergraduate interns who assist us with coding up content. So at the Jinan Birmingham Joint Institute, for computer-aided assessment, we use Mobius. This is similar to the College of Engineering and Physical Sciences at the University of Birmingham. However, we note that the School of Mathematics also uses Stack. This is likely a legacy of Chris Sanguin's time in the department. 2017-18 was the first year that the JBGI intook students, roughly 100 in number. And School of Mathematics staff were responsible for 80 taught credits. In total, this meant designing 16 45-minute class tests and some introductory assignments to form the continuous assessment for our students. Now, regarding content development here, John Watkins' team oversaw this, and I was tasked with learning the ropes to take on the role in the following year. Regrading of assignments, a job that occurred throughout the semesters, was performed by John's team, and again with the view that this would be undertaken by people in the School of Mathematics the following year. Now, at this point in time, in 2017-18, class tests were planned for all years and for the foreseeable future. However, once we implemented this, there were some practical considerations which highlighted that scaling class tests, that is closed book class tests, was risky given the rise in numbers of our cohorts in the coming years. And so this provided a practical motivation to change this setup. I had a personal motivation to change it too, which was that I wanted to move more towards an assessment for learning as opposed to an assessment off learning setup for our continuous assessments. I suppose this meant, in my view, that we've moved more towards open book, large time or long time period assessments with more randomization. Now, the point of perspective was that the longer time period would be less stressful for students, and additionally they could cover more of the syllabus and in more depth because simply there's more time. So I proposed this idea and it was approved higher up so we could enact it in the following academic year. So moving on to the 2018-19 academic year, now content development was overseen by myself and regrading of assignments was overseen by Rob and I, with the view that, in honesty, we didn't know how much work it would take and would decide and report back on how much it was at the end. We found out it was quite a lot of work, and we changed things for the following academic year. But that year, Rob and I did all of it. Now, in the 2018-19 year, we had 200 new students, roughly, entering the programme, and School of Maths staff were now responsible for courses in 2 years, totalling 160 credits. Now, Year 1 assessments moved to open book, and the Year 2 assignments were kept as the 45-minute class tests that were closed book. This was done to keep things simple for new staff, because we concluded that closed book class test questions were simpler to write than fully randomized, deep, open book assignment questions. And so the view was, if staff were writing closed book tests in the first year, they would then gain an understanding of the Merbius system and be able to write more in-depth questions when they have a bit more time for the following academic year. And so this is the model that we've moved towards over time. Okay, so now moving on to the 2019-20 academic year. Me and Rob did report back on regrading, and now regrading is shared amongst the whole team. So now everyone in the team does some regrading, and content development was taken over by Rob, and Rob is still in charge of overseeing the regrading, albeit the actual workload is now shared out. Now, we have 210 new students who started in this academic year, and the School of Mathematics is responsible for 240 credits, 80 of those being Year 3 modules. And again, Year 1 and Year 2, we have open book assignments in this academic year. And Year 3, originally we planned to have closed book class tests, but COVID-19 sort of got in the way of that. So none of us could fly out and teach in person. We delivered the entirety of our teaching this semester remotely, which meant that these closed book class tests had to be switched to open book tests at relatively short notice. So here we provide an overview of the timings of the main jobs related to computer-aided assessment for the JBJI. We do so to highlight this is a year-long process without much let-up. Now, in July and August, pretty much for the whole month, we have content creation and development. And so this involves all module leads who require new content, the undergraduate interns who code all the questions for them, and some overseeing by the folks who manage all of it. In September, roughly, this is the start of semester 1, so we have to test Merbius and its linkages with Blackboard at VLE. And in addition, from September to December, we run assessments during the entire 16-week teaching period, and this includes assignment setups, running the assignments for students, and providing feedback to them when things are unclear, and after assignments are submitted, regrading. Now in November, I've noted that we hire interns, and this is for the period in the winter where we develop content. I've noted this because sometimes it can take a substantial amount of time to actually hire the interns, in particular during this COVID-19 period. Now in December and January, we have 2 weeks, well, one in December and one in January, where we have an intense content development period. And this is really to finish off the things we didn't finish during the summer period in July and August. Now, January, I'll note, is probably the quietest month from my experience of this. And in Feb, we resume semester 2. So we test Merbius again and its links with Blackboard. And between March and June, roughly ignoring Feb, we have a 16-week teaching period with assessments every 2 weeks, which require the same sort of work as in semester 1. And in May, we get to the point where we are hiring interns for the next cycle of content development for the next July and August. And in principle, this cycle repeats itself with some changes each year. Regarding content creation and development, we begin with our undergraduate interns. So after being hired, that is in July, they are given 1 week's training, and typically we hire some new and some experienced interns. The experienced interns help to train the new interns. Now, for the interns' perspective on this employment opportunity, their blogs from 2017 and 2018 are available. Now, we note that interns in the December-January period are typically taken as a subset of those employed during the summer, and this is mostly because there isn't time to do any training in that period. Now, module leads, in terms of content development, are given an understanding of the functionality of Mobius, and then they're asked to write questions in LaTeX, typically for the interns to code in Mobius. Sometimes there are exceptions to this, and module leads will request snippets of code that they can use to create questions themselves. This may be standard bits of randomization code to generate random versions of questions, or otherwise. Sometimes they've also asked interns to answer their questions about coding in Mobius, essentially providing help for them to code things in Mobius. Ultimately, intern time is allocated to each module lead, and they can use it how they see fit. Most of them use it to ask the interns to code questions, though. Now, typically interns will code questions and test questions too, and generally each question will be tested by several interns. Once this process is complete, module leads will then test the questions, and if edits are required, they'll be sent back to the interns to be edited and retested until the module lead is happy. Once the module leads are happy with the questions, they approve them for use, and the responsibility now lies with the module lead.
Okay, so now I will start talking about the way we design our computer-aided assessments. Over the past 3 years, we have developed the following set of principles that I have put together in a document to share amongst our staff. The first is that we do, wherever possible, try to avoid having multiple choice questions. It's not to say that they don't have their place, of course, in testing lower level skills, perhaps, but if we can get the students to input their own answer, we would prefer that. So for instance, if you expected a numerical answer, there's no reason they cannot type that in themselves. It also avoids reverse engineering the correct answer. So for instance, if you asked for the derivative of a function which had no trigonometric terms, but one of the terms did, a student could rule that out. Thus it is not a proxy for the same type of learning. Secondly, we favour natural input from students. Our students do not encounter Maple itself during their degree, so we do not want to force them to learn Maple or LaTeX syntax, as this is not part of the learning outcomes. These can cause some issues, however. For instance, in my own course, where I teach first-year algebra, including topics such as permutations and cycles, I've written my own parser to understand students' input that would be written the same way they would write it on paper. Next thing is, we give a few randomised versions of each question. However, we don't suggest randomly choosing anything. We need to be careful to ensure that the different versions are of roughly comparable difficulty. For instance, if you generate a matrix, we may fix the number of zeros or have similarly sized determinants. Here is a non-trivial example from my own course. This plot shows the running time for the Euclidean algorithm, which finds the highest common factor of two integers. A small change in input can lead to drastically different running times, as seen in the plot. One final point I want to make: whenever you design any assessment, including in traditional formats, you have to ensure it will be a proxy for the learning you intended. Especially as this is a summative assessment and students only get one attempt, we don't want to conflate the assessment of different skills in an ambiguous way. This is an example of a question and a potential student's response, and I want you to try and think and decide how many marks should the student receive. Give the second order Taylor series expansion of the exponential function about the point x equals 1. The student responded with 1 plus e over 2 times x squared. So, did the student calculate the expansion about the point x equals 0, which the form of their response suggests, in which case only the constant term is correct? Or, they calculated the expansion about the point x equals 1, and expanded the brackets to be in a series in x instead of x minus 1. Doing this, the correct answer would be e over 2 plus e over 2 times x squared. There is also the issue of the missing x term. So should the student have given this term explicitly as 0 times x? If this were a written question, we would hopefully see their working and have an insight on their thought process that in turn allows us to assess their learning more accurately. This question assesses two different skills: differentiating a function even more than once, and the definition of a Taylor series approximation. A better designed question would split the assessment of these two skills apart and allow the carrying forward of errors from one part of the question to the next. Now we move on to the grading section of our assessment pipeline. Whilst the grading process is automated, we still require someone to check over the results for several different reasons, such as misunderstood syntax. There could be unmatched brackets or a missing multiplication symbol, and the Maple engine would raise an error in this case. We don't wish to penalise students for minor syntactic mistakes, provided their intentions are clear. Another issue that can arise is edge cases, different ways of expressing the solution. This is especially the case if there are multiple correct answers, such as a question that requires giving an example with some properties, or if we wish to reward partial marks. No matter how prepared the question writer is, there will always be unknown unknowns, and students can always surprise you. And finally, there may be bugs in the grading code or in other parts of the platform. By regrading, we help to ensure the assessment is fair for all students. Now, it would obviously be tedious to check every student's answer and would render using Merbius pointless. Unfortunately, there is no easy way to summarise responses within Merbius currently, so we use a custom piece of JavaScript code developed by John Watkins and his team to do this for us. This script collates students' responses, tallies them, and for any particular response automates the process of adjusting the marks for all students who gave it, but it is still clunky and time-consuming. The lack of such a feature within Merbius has been brought up as far back as 2004 in the literature. The person regrading will raise any issues encountered with the lecturer and defer to them should any changes need to be made. The regrader collates these together and produces a small report for the lecturer, which can be used to improve and refine the question for future use. The most common of these issues is the misunderstood syntax. In Merbius, if the grading code raises an error, then the output is 0 marks. So Merbius does not distinguish between 0 marks being awarded correctly and the student's response causing an error in Maple. So last summer, I decided to implement a code wrapper for all non-trivial questions that would catch any errors raised by Maple and return a mark of 1% for that question should there be any errors. This helps aid our regrading process greatly, but it is still not perfect. So to conclude, I will summarise some suggestions that we feel should be incorporated into any sophisticated computer-aided assessment system. The first is to allow holistic approaches to grading, incorporating several response areas and allowing us to carry earlier errors made by a student into later parts of a question. In addition to this, having a classification of student responses prior to grading would allow us to debug code and regrade much quicker, as well as giving more detailed insight into our students' learning. Secondly, these systems should be internationalized. This expression here looks slightly odd to us, but these are in fact full-width characters and lenticular brackets that are used in many East Asian countries and in particular China. But they will not be recognized by Maple as they are different Unicode characters compared to the Western forms. Thirdly, the system needs to have natural interfaces for any area of mathematics, not simply focusing on numerics, functions, calculus and linear algebra. For example, from my own course, an ability to interact with graphs and networks by manipulating their individual nodes and edges. Finally, computer-aided assessment systems need to be designed from the ground up with assessment and learning in mind, including the computer algebra system that runs in the background. Currently, Maple oversimplifies students' input, so as a particular example, it is currently not possible to ask for a diagonalization of a square matrix A that is written by the student in the form P times D times P inverse, where the student is actually inputting the 2D notation for P and D. If we use the 2D math input, then their response gets calculated and will simply return the original matrix to the grading code. That's if the student has got the question correct. If instead I asked a student to respond with a 2-element list, PD, for those matrices, then that input would not be natural. And since permuting the eigenvalues in the diagonal matrix would permute the corresponding eigenspaces, answer boxes for each of P and D would need to be linked together, which Möbius cannot currently do. One workaround is to write a custom HTML question, including some form of natural input interface. But we would essentially be reinventing the wheel and creating a new assessment system by doing this. Thank you for listening to our talk. We look forward to your questions.
Okay, thank you, John and Robert. Now, I forgot to mention at the start of this talk the questions section on Moodle. It looks like, oh, we have one person. We have a question from Martin Greenhow. So first of all, I need to unmute Robert and John. Let me just do that while you give you some time to ask some more questions. Where's Robert? There he is. Okay. So this question from Martin Greenhow, why not trap any syntax errors before it's passed on to Maple for marking? Then you can either mark them wrong, throw it back at them, or fix it for them, and then pass to the marking system. So I guess, yeah.
I mean, I agree. There is some form of syntax checker, but it is... like I mentioned, if you have anything that's kind of custom, such as the example with cycles or something like that, you're writing that ad hoc on top of the system. Because it's a closed source software, there's only kind of so much we can do. And it does feel like the onus is more on digital ed to support these things that we're asking for.
It's worth mentioning that. So there's a preview option for when students input, but for simple questions where they're listing sets, often they just wouldn't because they assume they have the notation correct. And I suppose that's where we get into more issues.
Okay, I can remember I had a discussion with someone from Birmingham at the last EAMS about this. He was looking into making some kind of pre-filter on the student's input. So it looks like there's just some work for digital ed to do. Is that what you think?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Motivating them to do it as well is possibly work on our part.
Yeah, there are several things that we've been asking for. I mean, so I mentioned in the slides about this the lack that you can't collate the answers together and say how many students gave the answer 5 times X, say. That's been asked for since 2004, at least 16 years. They might be a little slow.
So for that grouping, we don't really have that in numbers either. And the reason for that is randomization. That it's hard to group things when everybody's getting shown a different answer.
Yeah, that's why we try to limit. So we suggest having like about 4 variations to try and limit it so that we've got some randomization for each question, but that there will be some ability to regrade as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So James Fody asks, I didn't quite get exactly how regrading will act. Will it eventually become automated? And can there be a risk in having to grade the regrade?
Yes, so probably at no stage do we plan to make it fully automated, but over time, as the questions are improved. So typically, when regrading, what will happen is Möbius will automatically grade an assignment. Then one of our members of staff will go in and look at what the regrade has done to check if anything has gone wrong. And so if nothing's gone wrong, then the regrading is quite fast. But if something's gone wrong, then they need to actually act and change some of the marks and notify the module lead that maybe the question needs to be rephrased, or maybe syntax hints need to be required, or extra cases of solutions need to also be included in the grading code. Those are probably the main things that they would do. So for a 20 question assignment, maybe 2 or 3 questions might need to actually be regraded. For the first year it would run, and then by the second year those have been fixed, so they won't need so much work in the following year.
We would always need to check over these things anyway. It's very common for our students to use these kind of like lenticular brackets, full width commas and such, which just don't get picked up. We did put in a case actually for interns this summer, although that's being blocked higher up by our uni because of COVID and trying to save money. But one of the things I was intending to do would be to have some kind of catch-all, so basically replace any Unicode comma with the kind of ASCII comma, and same for brackets and so on. So we'll see whether I have time to do that amongst my other duties this summer, but that was part of the plan.
Okay, so that's interesting. It's something that we encountered a little bit this year with students going back home to do their assessments. They would be using their home keyboard set to international. It didn't affect us too badly, apart from the Mac keyboard's circumflex character isn't the same as on the British layout. We discovered. So these things turn up. Yeah, so that's a really important point for people developing an e-assessment system, that these international character sets.
And it's kind of really frustrating as well, because it can be hard to spot. It's like, what is wrong with this response? It's only because this full width character, it does look slightly different, but it can be quite hard to spot.
Yeah. Took us a couple of days to find that circumflex one. Right. I think I'll just check again for any more questions. Oh wow, a few more. I'll do one more. Chris Sanguine has a question. He says, you gave one example of differences in notation. Have you, or could you, provide a comprehensive Rosetta Stone comparing standard notations in the UK with those in China, which I think would be widely useful?
Oh yeah.
Probably.
The amount of regrading I've done, I know the Unicode characters that seem to come up quite a bit, because all our students are Chinese as well. So I can certainly do that. And what I would recommend is basically for developers to look at Unicode and be able to find all the kind of commas and so on. There should be a list out there somewhere, I'd imagine.
Mostly commas and brackets from memory, isn't it?
Yeah.
There are two aspects here, aren't there? There's characters that look similar, and then there's notation where the structure might be different, or you might, for example, use a comma instead of a dot for a decimal separator.
Yeah, and so I haven't spotted the comma dots thing. I don't know if you have, John.
Well, that would be the difference between the UK and
Europe. Yeah, I could do that.
That would be very helpful.
I just make a comment. One thing I've noticed over 20 years is there's some forms of hard-won academic knowledge that nobody ever bothers to write down and publish. It's not research, it's not teaching, it's not a textbook. If you could take the trouble just to write 2 pages, it would be hugely appreciated, and not just by the developers, by colleagues trying to teach.
We are actually planning to write up our own review of Merbius with John Watkins and some people from his team. Yep. So I'm sure we'll include that there. Our whole experience. Yep.
Great. Well, thank you both. There are a few questions on the Moodle site, so please go and have a go at answering those in due course. So we're going to move on to our second talk. I can now see that Alexei is here. So we have Alexei Vinitsky, who's going to tell us about a new Moodle question type. Over to you, Alexei.
Right, can you hear me? Yeah, great. Okay, so I'll start sharing my slides, and then I ask you if you can see my slides. Right, okay. Right, and share screen. And I want to share my show. Right, oh great.
Yes, we can see that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for telling me. All right, okay, so obviously I work at the University of Essex, and we use Moodle, and we used multiple choice questions for as long as I can remember to test definitions such as the definition of a limit. And right now, how do this? Oh, there. And about 10 years ago, we developed a new question type in Moodle because preparing such questions manually or using the standard interface in Moodle is not convenient at all. And suppose that each week you want to create between 5 and 10 questions for a formative test, for example, in your analysis module, and then you want to do it quickly in between 5 and 15 minutes. And this is why we wrote a new plugin for Moodle, a new question type, and we called it Blackwater. So if you ever talk to somebody from our university about that, we know it as Blackwater, and it is called after a river in Essex. Suppose you want to test a fragment of your lecture notes. It might be a definition. Here I give an example of a formula written in LaTeX. It does not have to be a formula. It can be something with words. It can be something without mathematical notation. It does not matter. The principle how Blackwater works will be exactly the same. So the idea is that if you have a certain fragment in your LaTeX lecture notes, you should be able just to copy and paste it into Moodle, and then it would be almost a ready-to-use question. I'll show you how it works. Right, so what we did about 20 years ago, we would look at a certain definition in analysis, and we would change something in it. I don't know if you can see my mouse cursor, but here we have changed quantifiers. And let me show you another example. And here, for example, we swapped greater for less and less for greater. So we can have these two possible types of distractors, and also we can combine them as well to make it more difficult for the student. And this is how our typical formative tests every week would look about 15 years ago. So obviously we would ask which one of these 4 definitions is correct. Now you imagine we had to prepare that by hand in LaTeX, which took some time. And after that we had to mark it by hand, which again takes some time. And there is no reason at all to mark multiple choice tests by hand. So this is why we developed a new Moodle question type, which would make these changes more or less automatically, and also permute the order of options at random. So every student will get the options in each question at random. And also, what was the guiding principles of what we did is that we're not making random changes in a definition. We are making changes in some parts which actually influence the logic of this definition, like changing quantifiers or changing less to greater. So these changes are small, and they are not all over the place. They are in some carefully chosen places. Obviously, when you choose which parts to change, this is not a random choice. This reflects your understanding of a lecturer as to what kind of things student might find confusing. And this is why your distractors intentionally concentrate on these parts of the definition. So here in particular, what we're thinking about, each quantifier can be replaced by the opposite quantifier. This is what you can think of as change of type 1. And then each inequality can be replaced by the opposite inequality. And this is what you can think of change of type 2. After that, what you do, you take your definition from your LaTeX lecture notes, you copy and paste it into Moodle, you indicate that you want to use this kind of change and this kind of change, and after that you have a working question, which obviously will be self-marked in Moodle. We also use these questions for summative tests in the middle of the term and the end of the term, but the primary purpose was to create many questions so that every week students will encounter some questions in formative tests, and obviously because it is Moodle, then it means that after each question, not only you see their marks, but you can see who attempted which test and who didn't, and then you can contact those students who didn't and ask what was it that they did not understand and why they did not attempt. So, how do you create a question in Blackwater? You concentrate on what types of change you want to apply and in what parts of the definition, and after that you just indicate in these parts using a special notation what you want to replace by what. So let me show you a couple of examples. For example, 2 add 2 is equal to 4. So let us check if a student really knows that 2 add 2 is equal to 4 or some other number. And then you would copy and paste this fragment of your lecture notes, 2 add 2 equal 4, into Moodle. And after that, you would add distractors. Now, here, what I indicate is that the answer can be 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. Now, I must say that in this particular question, I was writing it early in the morning and I did not quite write it correctly. There is a misprint on it. The first answer in Blackwater should be the correct answer. So this entry should be 4. And after that, we should have distractors such as 1, 2, 3, 5. So what happens here? It is the first type of change. So this is why here we have comma, comma, 1. Then we have several options separated by double commas. And then the list of options ends with comma, comma, full stop. And as a result, when you get a question in Moodle, what will happen? It will choose the correct option, and it will choose some incorrect options to make 4 different answer options in total. It will shuffle them in a random order, and it will show them in a question. So this is how this question will look. Now let us look at another question, which is slightly more interesting. So x minus y squared is equal to x squared plus y squared minus 2xy. Suppose this is a fragment of your lecture notes, and suppose you want to test how students understand it. So obviously you have some 2's here in the answer. You have the coefficient 2 in front of xy, but not in front of x squared and not in front of y squared. So the first type of change that we can think of is ask the student whether 2 should be in front of xy or in front of x squared and y squared. And then we have 1 minus here, and this minus is in front of 2xy, but maybe it should be in front of y because... So the second change will be to put minus either in front of y squared or in front of minus 2xy as it should be. So this is how you should change this LaTeX code. So you copy this LaTeX code from your lecture notes into Moodle and add distractors in this way. So in front of x squared, we should not have any coefficient, or an incorrect option is to have a coefficient 2. Likewise, in front of y squared, the correct option is not to have a coefficient, or a distractor is to have, again, a coefficient 2. In front of xy, the correct option is to have coefficient 2, and an incorrect option, a distractor, is not to have a coefficient. And likewise, regarding pluses and minuses, this will be a change of type 2. The correct option in front of y squared is to have plus, and an incorrect option is to have minus. Now, in front of 2xy, the correct option is to have minus, and the incorrect option is to have plus. So now if you just copy and paste this code into Moodle and show what your question shows, there it is. So these are the possible answer options produced according to the rules which we have written. As you can see, a number of subtle changes are made to the formula, and it is not easy to see immediately which one is the correct one. Obviously, one of them is the correct one, but it will take a minute or two for a student to find out which one is the correct one. So this is how it works. There is also some other functionality in Blackwater, but we never really used it. We stick to this one. So we add several types of possible changes. We indicate in small fragments of the definition how the distractors are created. And as you can see, they can be interdependent. So the change in one part of the formula is reflected by a change in another part of the formula. And in this way, in 1 or 2 minutes, you can create a nice, versatile multiple choice question like this one. So this is what I wanted to show you today. And if you have any questions, please ask me.
Thank you very much, Alexei, for quite a short talk. I'm not sure we have one question again from Martin Greenhow about this talk. He says, given that the epsilon delta definition is gibberish to many students, the sorts of changes made are still feasible. The twiddling the change of quantifiers and signs. However, your algorithmic approach may not work in other contexts where the distractors might be unfeasible at a glance. So what I was going to ask something similar about this. So what's the pedagogical benefit of these kinds of questions where when a student picks the wrong answer, what do you learn from that?
All right, yes, we had to think about that. It is perfectly possible to write some automated feedback for this, but we skipped that because the idea was that there can be only generic feedback in the particular implementation that we wrote. The generic feedback can be like, read this chapter of your lecture notes in case the answer is incorrect. But what we do, we encourage the students to come back to us whenever they receive an incorrect answer. So what they do, either they reproduce this incorrect answer in front of us and ask what happens, or they take a screenshot and send it to us and ask to explain to them. So this is how we work with them. As I'm saying, this is a tool which works best when you repeat it frequently. And this way, those students who engage have a chance to understand that they don't understand something within the same week, rather than waiting till some larger assessment, which happens perhaps in 4 weeks' time.
Okay.
I don't know if it answers your question.
It does a bit, yeah. I think maybe it answers Martin's part of the question. So the way I normally operate when writing a multiple choice question is that each distractor should have a certain error behind it that I'm expecting a student to make.
Yes.
So if the student picks that wrong answer, you can give some feedback saying you probably made this mistake. Is that something you can do?
In our implementation, no, we did not do anything like that. We did not write any form of feedback apart from very generic feedback.
Right.
Because again, we thought we can easily produce many distractors, which will produce many different possible errors, which hopefully students will make, and this is how they will come back to us and ask us about what was wrong in my answer.
Okay.
But no, we did not expect the computer to actively teach them.
Right, okay. We have a question from Sally Barton. Just wants to know if we want to use Blackwater in our Moodle installation, what do we do? So is it open source? Is it available?
Yes, it's just a PHP code, so so definitely we can share it.
Okay. Right, well, oh, one more question. They're still coming in. Oh, James Foley asking basically the same thing. So it's a Moodle plugin that will be possible to install into Moodle.
Yes, it is a straightforward question type. So it installs itself when you work with Moodle. You see it just as one more question type.
Lovely. Great. Well, thank you, Alexei. I don't think we have any more questions now, so we can move on to talking about the afternoon session. In fact, not just the afternoon, because at 12 o'clock we have the meeting about the research working group on pedagogy of e-assessment. I can't remember exactly what it was called. So I'm going to show you a slide about that. There we go. So this will take place in the same Zoom room as the EAMS live sessions have been taking place, so that the link at the very top of the talks page. There are some questions under the e-assessment working group course for you to have a look at. So leave your comments, suggest additional questions, and rate your priorities for the working group. So that is a session taking place today, midday until 1 in the afternoon BST. Okay, and so I think all that's left now is to have a look at the afternoon's program. Let's make sure I've got the right browser. Right, so this afternoon we have 3 more lightning talks. We have a talk about using Jupyter Notebook to support maths learning, talk about gender differences in response to assessment tasks, I think a critical view from Sally Jordan, and a talk about Plom, which is a system for doing, for marking online. Okay, so thank you to the speakers again. Thank you all for coming and viewing, and we'll see you either at midday or this afternoon.